Okay, so this video is going to be all about trying to help you guys effectively incorporate text evidence into your writing. One of the problems that I've seen in most of your writing so far this year is that we are still using some of those really beginner lead-ins to our evidence, and that's something that we really need to work on. Some of those that I see very frequently is an example from the text is the author states, I know this because the text states. All of those are very elementary. Those are the kinds of things that you learned as a young writer when you were first trying to incorporate text evidence, but we are past that now, and you should be using things that are more sophisticated. Another problem is some of you guys are still using really, really long pieces of text evidence that might include multiple lines from the text. And really, most of the time, that's too much. You want to narrow it down so that you're only quoting what's most important. So this is what we're going to kind of work on throughout this video. The goals for you are choosing really strong and meaningful text evidence that's going to help support your answer, choosing a concise or a short piece of evidence, and then providing transitions into your evidence that give the reader some context about what's happening in the story, or maybe which character said something in a story, or even if it's an informational article. And then you also want to incorporate evidence in a way that allows your sentence to flow seamlessly. So I'm going to show you some examples of that. First, I want you to take a look at this sample that's written below. And then on the paper that you have, I want you to write down the problems that you see with this writing. So if you would, pause the video for a moment and take a second to do that. So now that you've read this example, in the beginning of the story, the narrator clearly explains that he killed the old man just because of his eye. The text states, I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. The first thing that stands out is that the quote is really long. You have an introduction to your evidence that says, the text states, when we know a character is the one who made this comment. So that transition to your evidence is really basic, and there's no detail about who says it. We already mentioned that the quote is way too long, and the evidence doesn't flow seamlessly with a sentence. When you look at that, it's very clear where your introduction to evidence stops and the quote begins, okay? So look at the new way that this is written. So I've changed it to this version, which says, in the beginning of the story, the narrator clearly explains that he killed the old man just because of his eye. When revealing his motive, the narrator explains to readers that he loved the old man and that he had never wronged him or insulted him, leading readers to understand that the sole reason for the murder was the narrator's distaste for the old man's eye. What you'll notice is when you read this sentence that has the quote, you really can't tell which part is quoted directly from the story unless you see these quotation marks because of the way that it's written, right? You'll also notice, look over here, how much text evidence is quoted. Over here, it's only 4 words. So you really pull out and kind of narrow down the most important words or phrases, and then you paraphrase the rest. These two examples are saying the exact same thing, but this one says it in a much more sophisticated, a much more seamlessly flowing way. So let's look at another example. Pause the video and take a second to read it, and I want you to write down the problems that you see just like you did for the first one. Okay, so what we have written here, the narrator says, acting like a madman, the disease had sharpened my senses, not dulled, not destroyed, not dulled them. This states that the narrator already had a disease which might have turned him crazy. So the problems that we see, the lead-in is a little bit confusing and there's not a smooth transition there. He says, acting like a madman. That's just worded a little awkwardly. The evidence is not really incorporated with the right grammar or punctuation. It doesn't flow. And then Over here, we've got a new way that it's written. So it says the narrator reveals his own insanity when he claims that he has a disease which sharpened his senses. Admitting to readers that he has some disease implies that he is likely referring to a disease of the mind, which indicates he is insane. So again, you'll see that over here, where you've got an entire sentence quoted, but over here, you only took the phrase that was really important. And then the rest you explained in your own words. Also, you'll notice that I changed this pronoun from my to his so that it flows more seamlessly in your writing. It doesn't sound like an interruption in what you're saying to go back to the story. So it really just flows a lot more smoothly. Okay, so a final example. Pause the video for just a second and read it and write down the problems that you see. So it says, his insanity is shown through his thoughts such as, I loved the old man, he had never wronged me, he had never given me insult, for his gold I had no desire, I think it was his eye. The narrator says that he loves the old man but murders him because of an eye. So the problems that we see, again, there's not a smooth transition to that evidence. There's too much evidence. Look at the amount of evidence in comparison with the amount of the author's own words here, the writer's own words. And then this analysis, the narrator says he loves the old man but murders him because of an eye, that says the exact same thing that the quote says, and that's a problem. So check out the way that this is written, the new version. The narrator reveals his insanity to readers through his thoughts by showing that he loved and cared for the old man and even admits that he had never wronged him. He also reveals that it was his eye that drove him to commit the murder. Because he committed such a violent act toward someone who he supposedly cared for and did so for such a trivial reason, he clearly exhibits qualities of someone who is mentally unstable. So again, we broke up this piece of text evidence, only pulled the parts that were most important, and then we incorporated them into a sentence that flows all together. Once again, you would not be able to tell which part of this was quoted from the text unless you were looking at it and you see the quotation marks. Also, the analysis here doesn't just repeat what's in the text evidence, it's really explaining how the evidence that you pulled from the story supports your answer and explains your answer, okay? So the next couple of slides are a couple of problems I'd like for you to practice with. So I give you a quote and I tell you where the quote is from, and then I give you what your goal should be when you incorporate that into a sentence. So what you're going to do is basically pull the quote and the goal together into 1, 2, maybe 3 sentences to try to accomplish whatever this goal is in a way that incorporates part of the quote that you've been given so that it flows seamlessly and there's a smooth transition into that text evidence. So if you'll pause the video for a second, I'm going to let you copy these down and work on them. And now we'll move to the next slide, and you've got 2 more problems to work on.